I'd been dating Jason Myers for 2 months when he finally invited me to meet his parents. He'd been strangely reluctant to the idea, having met my parents on multiple occasions already, and I was really starting to get anxious about the whole thing. Was he embarrassed? Was I not good enough for his parents? But when he finally called and asked if I wanted to join him for dinner at his parents' house, I was over the moon. It meant that he took us seriously. I knew that his family had rather eclectic beliefs, some pagan mix of something or other, but Jason had always seemed like the poster boy for normality. Well, almost. He told me he didn't really practice a religion, but that he had a deep respect for his parents who did, and he warned me before meeting them that they might be a bit different. I didn't mind different, though. Most of the time I even welcomed it. I showed up a bit early, having left with more than enough time to locate the address. I wasn't very familiar with that part of town, and all the houses more or less looked identical to me. "Look for the stone," Jason said, which didn't make much sense until it suddenly did. I'd driven through the narrow streets several times, glancing left and right for any clues, when suddenly I saw it. It was massive. A dusky obelisk carved from what looked like obsidian. What a bizarre freaking garden ornament, was all that I could think. I pulled up in the driveway, got out, and just stood there looking at the stone. It was extraordinary, sure, but it just looked so malpositioned, like it belonged in the middle of Stonehenge or something. Engraved on its smooth, glass-like surface was a single tribal eye. "Penny!" Jason suddenly called out from the front door. "You found it!" I smiled and walked over to him. I could see 2 figures crowding the doorway behind him, and as I approached, Jason stepped aside to let them through. "Penny," Jason said, "meet my parents. Mom, Dad, this is Penny." I smiled and reached out my hand awkwardly. Mr. Myers grabbed it firmly and gave it a rigorous shake. He was a tall, rugged, rather handsome man in his mid-50s. "Pleased to meet you, Penny," he smiled. "I'm Gerald. Jason's told us all about you." Mrs. Myers took my other hand and shook it gently. She looked thin and fragile, maybe a little bit older than Mr. Myers. I felt rather trapped standing there with a parent in either hand. At least they seemed welcoming. Too welcoming, one could even say. "I'm Vivian," she said. "So wonderful to finally meet you." I thanked them both and followed them inside. The house was nice, quite spacious, a normal family home by any standards. I tried to spot any abnormalities, like strange religious ornaments or iconography or some such, but everything looked perfectly dull and clean. "Dinner's almost ready," Mrs. Myers said, "so please, just take a seat." The dinner table was set up beautifully, with candles and napkins folded like swans, and all manner of lovely decorations. Jason pulled out a chair and beckoned for me to sit down in it. Mr. and Mrs. Myers disappeared into the kitchen, and I took Jason's hand and smiled. "They don't seem strange at all," I said. "Perfectly normal." "It's still early," he laughed. "Give it time." "By the way," I turned my gaze to the window, "what's the deal with the stone?" Before Jason had the chance to answer, Mr. and Mrs. Myers came back, hazardously balancing a few too many smoking hot pots and pans in their hands. "Please," I said, "let me help you." Mr. Myers chuckled and gracefully arranged the pots on the table with impressive speed and accuracy. "I used to work at a restaurant," he said. 30 years. I've got some practice." Mr. and Mrs. Myers sat down opposite us and smiled a creepily identical smile. "So, Penny," Mr. Myers said, "Jason told us you work with computers?" "Yeah," I smiled. "Software, actually." "One of those eggheads, huh?" he chuckled. I suppose that's a good occupation. Maybe she could take a look at our printer, Mrs. Myers chimed in. That darn thing never seems to work. Mom, Jason said, she's not here for work. Leave her alone. Oh, I'm sorry, she said. You're quite right, of course. My apologies, Penny. It's all right, I said. I could maybe take a look at it later if you want me to. They both just kept smiling, silently staring at Jason and me, and at some point it became rather unnerving. Suddenly, Mr. Myers got up from his seat and walked over to a cabinet at the far end of the room. He opened a drawer and took something from it, before returning to his seat. We have to pray for the meal, Mr. Myers said. But first, we need you to do something. I stared at him quizzically as he handed me an adhesive eye patch. My sister used to wear one as a kid to correct her lazy eye, but I just couldn't fathom why he wanted me to wear one now. I know it might seem strange, Mr. Myers said, but please, humour us. Wear it over your left eye, and I will explain everything as we go along. Jason squeezed my hand gently and smiled, and I realised we were getting into the weird religion part of the evening. I shrugged slightly and took off the wrapper, carefully placing the eye patch over my left eye as instructed. Wonderful, Mr. Myers said. Let us remove the veil. I gasped in horror as they all, Jason included, grabbed their left eye in between their thumb and index finger, yanked out the eyeball and placed it gently on the table. I knew Jason had an artificial eye, hence the almost in almost normal, but I had no idea the entire family were missing an eye. Now, Mr. Myers said, let us join hands. Mr. Myers extended his arm across the table, and I nervously did the same. When we were all joined, the three of them lifted their heads and just stared at the ceiling. Anxious and quite weirded out, I resolved to mimicking their behaviour. I don't know how long we held that pose, but I'm guessing roughly 5 minutes. My hands were shaking and my neck felt strained, when suddenly Mr. Myers started talking. I say talking, but that's not really what he did. It was like a deep, hoarse, croaking sound, like a frog was stuck in his throat and he was desperately trying to cough it up. I could see his neck bulging weirdly as the horrifying noises lowered and rose in pitch in mesmerising patterns, almost like a shamanistic chant or something. Then, just as sudden as it had started, he stopped, and everyone lowered their heads and let go of each other's hands. Now, Mr. Myers continued, let us feed the unseeing eye. Mr. Myers lifted off the lid on one of the pots, and they each stuck a hand in there. I edged back in my seat uneasily as I realised what was in it. I'm not sure what animal it was from, but I recognise entrails when I see them. They were uncooked and bloody, the slippery, squelching, repulsive sounds of their hands greedily grabbing them, causing my stomach to churn. What happened next caused me to get up from my seat in horror and disgust. They were stuffing the bloody, dripping entrails into their empty eye sockets, really pushing them in there with their fingers, and moaning creepily while doing so. I edged back until I reached the wall, unable to take my eyes off the vile, ungodly ritual. They kept doing this until the pot was empty, before Mr. Myers put the lid back on and smiled in my direction. Final part, Penny, he said. Don't worry. I know this all might seem very strange to you. They all grabbed their eyes from the table and plopped them back in. I could still hear the horrible squelching sound of the entrails slithering around in there. If I didn't know better, I'd say it sounded exactly like someone chewing. I'm sorry, I stuttered. I just remembered I have an appointment. I slowly edged from the wall towards the door, never once averting my gaze. I felt sick, repulsed, and utterly horrified, and I just wanted to get the hell out of there. Mr. Myers smiled. I understand, he said. We understand completely. He got up and walked to the cabinet again, opening another drawer, lifting from it a small cardboard box. Take this, he said, a parting gift. We are so glad you could join us, Penny. You are everything Jason said you'd be. I'd edged my way to the front door when he approached me, offering me the cardboard box ceremoniously. I grabbed the thing quickly and gave a fake smile in return. So sorry, I said. I just forgot what day it was. Mr. Myers chuckled. No need to apologise. We'll see you again soon, no? Yes, I said, hurrying out the front door. I walked briskly to my car, ripped off the eye patch, and reversed out of the driveway like a lunatic. I threw one last glance at the house. The three of them were standing in the doorway, smiling, waving energetically in my direction. It's been 5 hours since I got home. The first thing I did was sit down with a bottle of wine, just staring at the box. It took me 2 hours and 2 more bottles to muster up the courage to open it. It contained only one thing, one single item, but it immediately sent shivers down my spine. An artificial eye. The thing is, it looks exactly like my eyes, same colour and everything. And I don't know what's going on with my left eye. It's been itching something terrible, and it feels swollen and sore. And sometimes, I swear I can feel something moving behind it.